I'm Glyn Brailsford from the IEA. It's great to see so many of you here on a summer evening. A few apologies first. If the building, if those of you who are familiar with the building, if it looks a bit like a sort of seaside resort in winter at the moment, that's because we're going through a little summer refreshing, and you'll see we've got some plaster off the wall in the room next door because we had a leaking down pipe, all that kind of stuff. This is what happens to charities. If you'd like to help us out with it, please do talk to me later. It's always good to get it in early. And just a few housekeeping points. The loos are, for the gentlemen, they're this way, to your right or upstairs. For the ladies, they are downstairs, so the women won't be on top in that sense this evening. But that wasn't deliberate. Excuse me. Frog in my throat. I didn't pour myself any water. No, I'll be fine, don't worry. And also, I think we've got a fascinating session in store for you this evening. Before we get to that, can I just say, for those of you, I saw a few of you browsing this. Let me just explain. This is a magazine. This was the first issue of a magazine, we call it EA, that is now being distributed to every school in the country teaching A-level economics and IB economics as well. And we've got a terrific response to it so far. I'm just working on the next edition, which will be out in September in time for new term and for Freshers' Fairs. And again, if you'd like to help us pay to get this posted out, please do approach me. Maybe I'll ask for too much money now, but yeah, as a charity perhaps you can't do that. As I said earlier, we've got a fascinating session in store this evening. As ever at the IEA, I think you'll hear opinions that are both controversial and considered, and they're not mutually exclusive, of course. And I'll leave it at that, but just let me introduce our chair for the evening, Ruth Lee.
Well, I'm absolutely delighted to be here. That's fine. And the subject for tonight's discussion is called Women on Top. Should the EU be imposing gender quotas in the UK? I suspect that's something of a tendentious question. And indeed, we've been asked by the IEA, I think Glyn actually put these questions together, and they have a certain splendidly tendentious quality about them, but that's all to get the little grey cells and the juices, I've no doubt, going. The first question is, should a seat in the boardroom be based on merit or gender? I wonder what the answer to that is. Should companies make board appointments in the interests of shareholders, customers and employees? Or in the name of political correctness? I wonder what the answer to that one is. Or is this a necessary way, in other words quotas, of correcting imbalances in the UK's senior management structures? But it's not for me to answer these questions. Well, I think I've already answered them, but never mind. I don't want to preempt any of tonight's discussion at all, and I don't want to prejudice the debate. God forbid it. Without more ado, I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker, Godfrey Bloom, MEP. Now, Godfrey began his very, very distinguished city career back in 1967, when some of us were still at school. No, we weren't at school. At least I wasn't at school. I was already at university, but there you go. I'm quite sure that quite a few people here were still at school. But he retired from investment management in 2004 to take up his seat in the European Parliament, in inverted commas, for UKIP, and he represents Yorkshire and North Lincolnshire. He's worked very actively in several parliamentary committees in Brussels, including the Women's Rights and Gender Equality Committee, so well equipped for tonight's debate. He's an extremely well-known media figure, an associate of the von Mises Institute and indeed the Institute of Economic Affairs. So without more ado, over to you, Godfrey.
Thank you. Well, good evening, everybody. I sit indeed on the Gender and Women's Equality Committee, which I have to say is one of the silliest committees in the European Parliament, and my goodness me, it has some silly committees. Now, I've been watching, and I've been on this committee since 2004, and I've been watching the way that this particular wind has been blowing, and I can assure you that this gender quota system will come. It will come. Make no mistake about that. There's nothing very much we can do about it. The European Commission and the European Parliament are determined upon it. And of course, when it becomes, when they want something, it comes into law, and there's very little that we can do about it. As you know, 75% of our law is now made in Brussels, and this will be no exception. So I warn you that it's coming. Now, other people are going to talk about whether it's a good idea or not. Clearly, everybody will have their own view, especially at the Institute of Economic Affairs, whether this should come about. But I think what is very important that you understand is if it is inevitable in some form, I think we need to be ready for it. And I sometimes hear a rather naive view that it would be all right if there was a quota system if it was voluntary. And people will breathe a sigh of relief that if it's voluntary, that's okay. Well, that doesn't work like that, ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you. Because what will happen is that if it's voluntarily signed up to, there will be some form of kite mark that will go with it. So at the bottom of the paper will be, as you see today, we are a member of the Equal Opportunities, or Equal Opportunity Employers, or some such. This will have, we are in line with the gender arrangement, or whatever phraseology that may come up. And you will then find, of course, that what has become voluntary now has become compulsory. Because if you are a pension fund manager, or you're giving any service industry, or indeed manufacturing industry to the state, any public purchaser, you will find that you will not be able to manage that council pension scheme unless you're signed up to this kite mark. You won't even get to the presentational stage. And I make that point because I was a pension fund manager. And I used to bid for business, and I've been up to see the trustees, and the trade unions will be behind this, and I'll be speaking to trustees of pension schemes who would be trade union members, and without that kite mark, you'd be whistling Dixie for the business. So don't believe for one moment that a voluntary system is going to be somehow appropriate or even workable. This is a very typical backdoor method of putting pressure on companies to comply. And this was first mooted in 2004 when I joined that committee, and I've seen that getting stronger and stronger until it's virtually become a mainstream argument, which it wasn't in 2004, but I can assure you now, smelling the wind as I do in the European Parliament and the Commission, this is how it's going to be. So two things really to leave you with as a member of this committee. It's a rather sad committee, which is formed largely of people who were selected by the quota system. So the women on that committee are not meritocrats, they are selected by the quota system, which means that they live and they eat and they breathe by that system, not a meritocracy. Which sadly, of course, also means that they have no great confidence in their sisters. They have no great confidence because they think that women need special help because they needed special help. And so it breeds, does it not, this lack of confidence in themselves, which they then pass on to the sisterhood. It's totally patronising and archaic, but I would counsel you very, very strongly, do not be content at all to accept a voluntary system and think that you've made some sort of victory. You haven't, you won't, but it is coming, and we need to think about how we're going to deal with it. And I would suggest maybe a kite mark at the bottom of the writing paper of any company or in the company accounts, and that kite mark might read something along the lines of this company is meritocratic, all promotions are based on meritocracy and not quotas of any sort. Thank you.
Very much, Godfrey. I find that really quite disturbing. Not least of all as a woman who's struggled her way up the greasy pole and fall off it once or twice, but there you go, that's life. I'm delighted to welcome the second panellist, that's Jo Farley, who is the co-founder of, was the co-founder of the organic chocolate company Green and Blacks, which I'm sure we're all very familiar with. It was sold to Cadbury's in 2005 and is now a 100 million brand worldwide. A terrific success. Jo is also a journalist and an author, and the newly appointed business columnist on the Telegraph Women's website. Suffice to say that as a groundbreaking entrepreneur, and she really is, she has terrific insight into commercial realities of business and is therefore extremely well qualified to talk on tonight's debate.
Sadly, don't have any chocolate with me in case you want it. My name's Jo Fairley. I was the youngest magazine editor in Britain at the age of 23. I'm co-founder of Green and Blacks, and I went on to create a couple of other successful businesses. And I absolutely believe in equal rights, in equal opportunities, and in equal pay. And I would love to see women in 40%, if not 50% of the board roles in this country. But I don't share the view that this can be forced through on a quota basis. I absolutely believe it has to happen organically. I think it is deeply insulting to women to propose that this balance is almost overnight shifted in favour of women. Not one single woman who is then appointed to a board will know for sure whether she got that there by dint of her own efforts or simply because of a difference in her body. And that kind of political correctness, I think, has made life for all of us in 2013 an absolute minefield. I do think that women bring a huge amount to the table in business, and that includes the board table. We are responsible for, as we've heard, the vast majority of purchasing decisions in households, from which car to buy to where to educate the kids to where to go on holiday, and that's quite leaving apart things like furniture, food, the clothes a household buys. And any company which isn't tapping into those insights, women's insights, is probably actually wasting a lot of money on focus groups for kick-off. My personal observation is also that women are highly effective in business. We waste no time sort of talking about things and tend to roll up our sleeves and do them. And I think this is because we have to juggle these things with our other roles in life. Now, throughout my career, I've employed women in all kinds of roles. But I think that the transition to having more of the Marjorie Scardinos, the Angela Arendts, the Nicola Hawlicks, etc., has to progress at its own pace. And what I think we need to do before we can get to that stage is actually, where women are equally represented at board level, we still have to make an effort to ensure that every single girl at the start of her school career is encouraged to believe that anything is possible and to set her standards higher. One of the key roles for women on board is to bring legal skills, to bring accountancy skills. And it's only when we've got girls really going into those subjects that we will have the feedstocks, if you like, for effective boards. And I think, unfortunately, we still have to encourage teachers to engage with this drive in co-educational as well as single-sex schools. Now, I happened to go to a single-sex school, but I had a put-down at the age of 15 which could absolutely have derailed me from my path in life. There are plenty of people who didn't think I would amount to very much in this world. And when I was 15, I had an instant where my careers teacher also happened to be my religious knowledge teacher. She was going around the room. Somehow it had degenerated into a discussion about what we were all going to do when we left school. And Jackie Chapman was going to Oxford to do medicine, and Dorcas Bird, glorious name, was going to Leeds to do law, etc. And she got to me and I said, I'd like to be a secretary. And Mrs. Wooden narrowed her eyes and said, Jo Fairley, if you ever make so much as a Girl Friday, I will eat my hat. And with that put down, she actually unwittingly ignited the rocket fuel which propelled me on my trajectory. But it is, of course, a completely unforgivable thing to say to any teenager. And I would love to think that this kind of thing doesn't still happen. But actually, I've visited 3 schools lately, and I have told that story. And at every single one of them, a teacher or a head teacher has come up to me afterwards and said, shamefacedly that it still goes on. So we need more initiatives like that developed by Esther McVeigh. She put together a magazine called If Chloe Can, which was later turned into a play at the National Theatre. And it set out to encourage girls from some of the most, the toughest backgrounds in this country to believe that they could succeed through positive role models and mentoring. And you know, that is not the kind of X factor, talent spotting, overnight success and glory, but the roll up your sleeves and make your own future approach. And I think that this is where the real shift towards equality, unfortunately, still has to take place, which also means that all of us who are women in business need to mentor, to nurture and to encourage all of the women that we know on the ladder to success. And also to ensure that our own organisations are places where women are always employed to their full potential, which also, I think, means offering working conditions which are as flexible as possible. And I think that that, as much as anything, is going to bring around the sort of shift, the sort of organic shift in boards and management, where those women who do reach senior roles will be able to feel that they got there through what they've achieved in their own right, and not to tick some political box. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jo. I agree absolutely with everything you said. Except for I have to say this, that I went to a co-educational school and we were never discouraged. We were always encouraged to do as well as the boys. It was quite extraordinary. The rest is history, by the way. I'm now delighted to introduce a fellow economist, someone who specialises in labour economics, Professor Len Shackleton of Buckingham University. He went to Buckingham in September 2011 after being at the University of East London, and he was also Dean of the Westminster Business School. He's also taught at the Queen Mary College of the University of London, and he was also in the civil service, which again, I'm afraid to say I was also in the civil service, but I tend to keep that rather quiet. He's worked in many, many think tanks, not least of all, the very, very distinguished Institute of Economic Affairs. And without more ado, over to Len.
Thank you, Ruth. I didn't know, as usual on these panels, you don't know what order people are going to be in, so you have to kind of tailor what you're going to say to your estimate of what other people are going to say. I assume, because I'm the only academic here, they won't be saying very much about the academic aspects of this, so I'm going to say one or two things as an economist, I guess. Oh dear, I'm sorry you weren't introduced. Anyway, perhaps the only economist here? Yes, right, okay. Well, first of all, I want to say that a lot of the argument about having women on boards is rather spuriously based on evidence. I think when you look at the actual evidence, it's very thin indeed. A lot of references made to things like the McKinsey report on the idea that companies which employ significant numbers of women on boards perform better. This study has been subject to a number of methodological critiques about the controls which are used and so forth. I think more importantly, the point is that these boards which appointed women chose them on merit. And what is being proposed here is, in fact, that women be imposed on boards, quotas be imposed on boards. And the evidence on that is really rather different. If you look at the work of Kenneth Ahern and Amy Dittmar on the Norwegian experiment, we do see that the evidence there seems to suggest that imposing quotas on boards actually worsens company performance. So there's the evidential basis is fairly weak. Also, there's kind of causal connections in there are pretty implausible, really. They tend to be based on stereotypical assumptions about differences in male and female attitudes and lifestyles. These vary enormously within genders as well as between genders. If we limit ourselves simply to average or modal behaviour, there may be something in this. But we know from psychological studies and so on that there is a huge range of behaviour and that there is overlapping distributions on behaviours of men and women. It's often suggested, for example, that women possess greater emotional intelligence are more consensual and have a more sensible attitude to risk than men. The evidence on that is various. On risk-taking, for example, there's been data from Germany which suggests that women who are actually appointed to boards do not show greater risk aversity than their male colleagues. If anything, it possibly works in the opposite direction. But leaving the evidence aside, I think the debate is only partially about evidence. It's about claims about fairness, and that's a thing which we all must feel and respond to. It's incontrovertible that the people who are on boards at the moment are atypical of the population. But this is not simply because of their maleness. They're wildly atypical of the male population in that they're highly qualified with MBAs in accounting or legal qualifications from top universities. They're widely travelled. They've often worked abroad in more than one country. Many possess excellent language skills, an increasing proportion are born abroad, although very few are people of colour. They're usually extremely single-minded, work ridiculously long hours, and have little family life. Some might consider them sociopaths or even borderline psychopaths. What is clear is that they have very little in common with the ordinary Joe in the street. Most of us males have as little chance of becoming FTSE board directors as, in Boris Johnson's words, being reincarnated as an olive. Maybe we do need more diversity, but how we actually get it is difficult to say. I tend to think as an economist of gender quotas in a wider context, because in fact this is only the start of it. If we take Godfrey's gloomy view that we are going to have these quotas imposed, where do we stop? It's worth reminding ourselves of the huge range of characteristics which are considered to define people and their chances in life. Let me give you some examples. In the USA, there is much experience of employment and university admission quotas based on race and ethnicity. Nearer home, Northern Ireland has had quotas based on religion in its police force. The Met want to do the same for BME candidates. In Canada, there have been quotas for what they now call Aboriginals. In Malaysia, jobs are reserved for ethnic Malays. In Finland, some posts are reserved for Swedish speakers. Roma people are given preferential treatment in Romanian universities. In India, so-called backward castes benefit from quotas, while in South Africa, non-whites get privileges as part of the empowerment strategy. In the United States, President Obama is currently trying to push for a ratio of 7% employees with disabilities in the workforce for federal contracts, while a Chicago politician is seeking contract quotas for businesses owned by lesbian, gay, bisexual or transgender people. Now, there is a lot of this going on, and once you start the idea of quotas, how do you actually where do you draw the line? It's possible to draw some generalisations, I think, from the experience of these quotas in very different areas and different groups of people. One is that results are often disappointing. Affirmative action quotas take many years to have an impact, and they often benefit people who are not particularly disadvantaged. If we end up appointing a lot of women to boards who have MBAs from top universities, accounting qualifications, legal qualifications, and so forth, they're not going to be any more representative of the population, really, than their male counterparts. So I think we'll see a lot of pressure in future, if this goes through, for having other forms of quotas as well. Another thing we see with quotas historically has been people making a buck out of them. In the United States, for example, preferential treatment for black contractors has led to examples of black frontmen for organisations which are largely white-owned. And in the more genteel area of getting women onto boards, we've already seen agencies set up who offer to get you into this position, no doubt for a substantial fee. We also see problems with in quotas with definitional issues, unintended consequences as people adopt their behaviour. In Norway, for example, the imposition of gender quotas on listed companies has seen some companies delist, and I think we'll probably see something similar in the UK. There are already a lot of pressures on companies to delist in the UK as a result of the burden of all sorts of corporate governance laws and so forth. So, my conclusions are as an economist, I don't think that as yet there is a clear evidential basis for the economic benefits which are claimed for this EU proposal. The reasoning behind, the theory behind these supposed economic benefits, in any case, seems to me to rely on stereotypes of male and female behaviour which are difficult to justify. And if the underlying basis for the proposal is belief in fairness and equality and proportional representation and so on, I would suggest very strongly that such a proposal will not be able to stop at gender inequality. The pressure will in time come to impose further restrictions on the representativeness of company boards. This will make listed companies spend more and more time on issues which are peripheral to their business success and encourage some to adopt different legal status. This in turn would fuel demands for yet more controls over a wider range of businesses, and as an economic liberal, I find this prospect unenticing.
Thank you very much, Len. That was really quite chilling, but there we go. And I had looked at the Norwegian results before, and they're pretty negative. Now, moving on to our fourth panellist, Dr. Clare Gerada, who is a London-based GP. She's been a GP since 1992. She's also the chair of the Council of the Royal College of General Practitioners and the first female chair for over 50 years, which I find quite extraordinary. A very distinguished career in health, having held a number of senior positions. She's been awarded the MBE for services to medicine and substance misuse, and the National Order of Merit Award in Malta for distinction in the field of health. And now I'm very much looking forward to hearing your comments, and I think I'm in front of you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me. It's obvious, isn't it, that anyone worth their salt should, like the likes of great women that have gone before, Margaret Thatcher, Angela Merkel, Christine Lagarde, should be able to rise through the ranks on their merit. But we know that there are considerable barriers for women to do this, not least the obvious fact of biology, that women, certainly for now, are child bearers, and we take the vast amount of responsibility for caring, be that our children or increasingly our elders. So, without quotas, currently women make up about 3% of the presidents or chairs of companies in Europe, and about 14% of board members of the largest publicly listed companies. So without quotas, at the rate of the trajectory that we're going at, by 2020 it will take around about half a century to reach the target that's been set by the EU. My husband told me that's almost as long as it will take for England to play Scotland again, but I didn't quite get that. We know that women make up 52% of the population and 60% of the graduates. And there are significant barriers to recruitment. We've heard that, the pipeline. And there's also significant problems with retaining women in the workforce, the leaks of the pipeline. And we need to address these if we're going to get the goal of equality of opportunity, irrespective of gender, which you've heard of. We've heard already from the four speakers that the case for pursuing greater representation of women on boards is overwhelming. There's a strong public interest. Makes sense, doesn't it, to use the full wealth of talent that you have at your disposal. We've heard, though the evidence probably is a little bit more circumspect, that there is benefit to businesses in having women in the boardroom. But at the very least, having a boardroom that reflects the diversity of its customers again makes sense. But we've heard, and I would agree, that to achieve this through quotas is perhaps not the way forward. If you ask women, and in fact the House of Lords did when they consulted on this last year, the vast majority of women that responded to them, in fact 85% of them, felt that quotas were unnecessary and a blunt and unsophisticated instrument that would cause more problems that it set out to solve, and would be a patronising effort that would cast doubts, as we've heard, on the competencies and capabilities of women in authority. The silver skirt getting there not on merit, but on the quota. And I agree with the House of Lords that mandatory quotas will not address the root cause of gender inequality or the lack of progression of our sex through the ranks. But let me tell you a bit about the profession that I know best, which is medicine. And I think medicine, the NHS, has been a great success. In 1948, women accounted for less than 20% of the medical workforce. Today, it's well over 50%, and in some specialties, such as my own, we represent 2/3 of the workforce. And to put that in context, in engineering, women make up only 3% of modern apprenticeships. I am the daughter of a single-handed male GP. And I have vivid memories of my father sifting through CVs of applicants applying to join him as a new partner. He created 2 piles. One, the smaller pile, were women, and the second, a larger pile, was the CVs belonging to men. I asked him what he was doing, and he said he would shortlist only from the latter pile, the male pile, as he would never appoint a woman as they were unreliable. Actually, I think what he meant was that they had babies, but he never quite said that. He never did. He never, in the whole time that he was a GP, ever appoint a female partner, and they ended up with 7. Fortunately, his views are antediluvian, and even if legislation doesn't prohibit this kind of discrimination, which in partnership it's not subject to the same equal opportunities, attitudes do. In general practice, the number of women reaching the most senior positions is increasing in the line with the overall number of women joining our profession. And some organisations, such as my own, the Royal College of General Practitioners, which is the largest of all the Royal Colleges in this country, women have achieved equality and beyond at the most senior level. Though I'm only the second woman to chair the college in its 65-year history, rather like London buses, whilst you wait ages for one female chair, 2 turn up at once. And my successor, Maureen Baker, will follow me this November, a formidably talented woman who was the longest serving college officer in the past, serving as our honorary secretary. Sorry about that. Beat. If somebody can tell me how to stop doing that. She served as our honorary secretary for over a decade. Our top table is now predominantly female, with me as chair, Maureen as chair-elect, Amanda Howe as honorary secretary, and Helen Stokes-Lampard as honorary treasurer. Our immediate past president, Iona Heath, was a woman. Our board, our council, is 90% female, and many of the senior committee chairs are held by women. The rise of women at the college has not been through quotas, or through appealing to equality amongst our membership, or tokenistic appointments. Instead, it's been through equality of opportunity through the pipeline, and also from the inherent flexibilities that general practice affords. So, for example, part-time working, career breaks, term time working only, and an almost predictable life-work balance. The college itself has encouraged the next generation to take leadership roles, both men and women. Trainee GPs have 2 full voting places on college council, and newly qualified GPs are funded to host their own support network. Mentoring, coaching, shadowing and secondments are actively encouraged at every single level throughout our organisation. So, my view is quotas will widen inequalities. They'll create a culture of mistrust from both sexes. The underlying reasons for the failure to achieve equality of opportunity must be addressed, and recommendations, as those that made in my own profession through Baroness Deach and her report on women in medicine, must be implemented. Both sexes are now calling for flexible working patterns, career breaks, mentorships and return to work schemes after periods of abstinence. Though medicine has still a way to go, it's streets ahead of your world. Maybe this is where the private sector must learn from the public sector and create opportunities for all those with talent. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And last but not least, I'm delighted to welcome Janice Atkinson, who has a multifaceted career. She writes regularly for the Daily Express and Huffington Post, and in 2010 she served as the Conservative candidate in Batley and Spen. Did you understand them up there?
Aye, lass.
Ah, fine, good. Have to get Godfrey to translate. But she's since moved over to UKIP, and she's now second to Nigel Farage on the MEP candidates list for UKIP for the southeast of England, for, of course, the European elections in 2014. And a bit of a CV which really quite amused me. She jointly launched the think tank womenon.org, for which she was crowned Quentin Letts' Woman of the Year in 2011. And Quentin Letts, in his characteristic way, said, "Janice is everything Harriet Harman is not."
Yeah, God, as good as that.
You can't get much better than that. And Harriet and I are just good friends. But I'm over to you, Janice, to tell us whether you think the EU should be imposing gender quotas in the UK. And I don't really wish to preempt what you might say.
Well, I firmly believe that interference from the EU is absolutely wrong, and that's why I campaigned to leave the EU. The EU is bad for business because it doesn't understand business. It doesn't understand the dynamics of business, and each of the 28 states, the member states, all operate very separately. And what they don't get is that a one-size-fits-all simply doesn't work. And now we have more interference from the EU, who want to impose gender quotas in the UK and publicly listed companies. Now, I don't know about you, but I get fed up as a female, as somebody in business who's been telling me how to run my business. But the political interference doesn't stop at the doors of the EU. We have Harriet Harman dictating to us that we should have gender quotas. And because they've introduced them in the Labour Party, then we should jolly well have them too in our companies. But you know, it doesn't stop there. Harriet Harmanista, as I call her, the high priestess of the Guardian feministas, also believe we shouldn't have single-sex clubs. She wanted to ban them last week. She wants to ban pastries girls as well, and she wants to wrap lads' mags up in little paper bags so we can't see them. And don't think any other parties are better. She's joined across the political spectrum of the ladies from the Conservative parties and the Liberal Democrats as well. They pander to a small number of niche lobby groups who shout very loudly about what they want, and they're getting it. I say to these women who make up the London Liberal elite, most of whom have never had a proper job in the private sector in their lives, have you actually asked what women want, rather than just chatting amongst your elites and the little bubble that you exist in? Have you asked the woman that works in Tesco's whether she spends her time, when she's working on the checkout, wondering what the gender balance is on the board of Tesco's, or whether Sir Terry Leahy's successor was a woman? No. Like us, all the women in this room, those that have ambitions, she has an ambition too. She may not have, that's her prerogative. But she might think, well, can I be a store manager one day? Can I go to get onto the board? But she's not sitting there obsessing about it. And we know that the retail sector has an excellent record in helping women to succeed. What we have to do is address the pipeline of women coming through companies with support and mentoring, as we've already heard from other successful people in business and the professions. And we want them to succeed, and we want to give them, what we have to do is give them profit and loss accounts and balance sheets to run, and put them in charge of staff and train them and help them. And that's how we fix the leaky pipeline. And remember also, a lot of women choose not to seek promotion. And again, we're standing in the IEA here. Some people are happy in life in what they do, and they just don't want promotion. We can't force this upon people. And then you think about the industries that they're trying to promote this in. What about the traditional industries that employ men? So North Sea diving, heavy engineering, electronics, and the motor trade. Where are they going to get their quotas from? It would be unrepresentative to force 50% of women in the boardroom on a company that did not have 50% of the female workforce. And is education at fault? I mean, like you, I go into girls' schools and I talk to girls. And again, I'm just frustrated at the times that girls are just pushed down the stereotypical gender route. And I've sat in grammar schools before where they're sitting there twiddling their hair And I say to them, what do you want to do? Oh, I think I want to be a nursery nurse or a teacher. And that's great. That's absolutely great. We need people in those professions. But my God, girls, you're 25% of the elite in this country, the educational elite. You know, there is a bigger, wider world out there. We need you to go out and do maths, engineering, and follow the, you know, the paths that you can. You know, stop being antediluvian about this. The girls and boys are supposed to be educated the same. Unfortunately, in other schools, they're still not. But, you know, like us, they make choices. Some are pushed down the more stereotypical route that I've said, but you can't force boys and girls to make career choices to make up a balanced gender quota, because that's basically what you're asking to happen. And then recently I attended a gender quota conference. Yes, they exist. And one of the participants was Gordon Brown's favourite pollster, Deborah Mattison, who runs Britain Thinks. And she recently published a comprehensive study of men's and women's attitudes to gender quotas, and she did quite a comprehensive study on this. I think it's probably, apart from the Davis report, the only one that's been done. And she found that across all classes and all gender, the result was an outstanding no, except in the public sector, where there was a small majority of women who were in favour of quotas. When Deborah turned around to the mainly female audience and said, quite indignantly, I'm dismayed, and I bet you are too. Do you know, she was rather surprised at the audience's visible no and the shaking of heads and the audible no's in the room. They didn't want positive discrimination or gender quotas. But that's what the chattering political classes want to happen. They don't understand what women want. And I suppose Masterson did ask them, and even though they gave the wrong answer, according to her, that won't stop Harriet Harman and her party, or the modern Conservative Party under Cameron, and it won't stop the EU, but it's up to us to try and stop them. Yeah.